Oh, there you are. Well, it's time for H7. I don't understand, said Thorin, and Bilbo felt he would like to say the same. The explanation did not seem to explain. Your grandfather, said the wizard slowly and grimly, gave the map to his son for safety before he went to the mines of Moria. Your father went away to try his luck with the map after your grandfather was killed, and lots of adventures of a most unpleasant sort he had. But he never got near the mountain. How he got there, I don't know, but I found him a prisoner in the dungeons of the Necromancer. Whatever were you doing there? Asked Thorin with a shudder, and all the dwarves shivered. Never you mind, I was finding things out as usual. And a nasty, dangerous business it was. Even I, Gandalf, only just escaped. I tried to save your father, but it was too late. He was witless and wandering, and had forgotten almost everything except the map and the key. We have long ago paid the goblins of Moria, said Thorin. We must give a thought to the necromancer. Don't be absurd. He is an enemy far beyond all the powers of all the dwarves put together, if they could all be collected again from the four corners of the world. The one thing your father wished was for his son to read the map and use the key. The dragon and the mountain are more than big enough task for you. Hear, hear, said Bilbo, and accidentally said it aloud. Hear what, they all said, turning suddenly towards him, and he was so flustered that he answered, Hear what I've got to say. What's that, they asked. Well, I should say that you ought to go east and have a look around. After all, there is a side door, and dragons must sleep sometimes, I suppose. If you sit on the doorstep long enough, I dare say you will think of something. And well, don't you know, I think we have talked long enough for one night, if you see what I mean. What about bed and an early start and all that? I will give you a good breakfast before you go. Before we go, I suppose you mean, said Thorin. Aren't you the burglar? And isn't sitting on the doorstep your job, not to speak of getting inside the door? But I agree about bed and breakfast. I like 6 eggs with my ham when starting on a journey, fried, not poached, and mind you, don't break them. After all the others had ordered their breakfast without so much as a please, which annoyed Bilbo very much, they all got up. The hobbit had to find room for them all, and filled all his spare rooms and made beds on chairs and sofas before he got them stowed and went to his own little bed, very tired and not altogether happy. One thing he did make up his mind about was not to bother to get up very early and cook everyone else's wretched breakfast. The tookishness was wearing off, and he was now quite so sure that he was going on any journey he was not quite so sure he was going on any journey in the morning. As he lay in bed, he could hear Thorin still humming to himself in the best bedroom next to him. Far over the misty mountains cold, to dungeons deep and caverns old, we must away ere break of day to find our long-forgotten gold. Bilbo went to sleep with that in his ears, and it gave him very uncomfortable dreams. It was long after break of day when he woke up. Chapter 2, Roast Mutton. Up jumped Bilbo, and putting on his dressing gown, he went into the dining room. There he saw nobody but the signs of a large and hurried breakfast. There was a fearful mess in the room, and piles of unwashed crocks in the kitchen. Nearly every pot and pan he possessed seemed to have been used. The washing up was so dismally real that Bilbo was forced to believe the party of the night before had not been part of his bad dreams, as he had rather hoped. Indeed, he was really relieved, after all, to think that they had all gone without him, and without bothering to wake him up. But with never a thank you, he thought, and yet in a way he could not help feeling just a trifle disappointed. The feeling surprised him. Don't be a fool, Bilbo Baggins, he said to himself, thinking of dragons and all that outlandish nonsense at your age. So he put on an apron, lit fires, boiled waters, and washed up. Then he had a nice little breakfast in the kitchen before turning out the dining room. and by that time the sun was shining, the front door was open, letting in a warm spring breeze. Bilbo began to whistle loudly and to forget about the night before. In fact, he was just sitting down to a nice little second breakfast in the dining room by the open window when in walked Gandalf. "My dear fellow," said he, "whenever are you going to come? And what about an early start? And here you have having breakfast, or whatever you call it, at 10:30. They left you the message because they could not wait." "What message?" said poor Bilbo Baggins, all in a fluster. "Great elephant," said Gandalf, "you are not at all yourself this morning. You have never dusted the mantelpiece. What that's got to do with it? I have had enough to do with washing up for 14. If you had dusted the mantelpiece, you would have found this just under the clock," said Gandalf, handing Bilbo a note, written, of course, on his own notepaper. This is what he read: "Thorin and Company to burglar Bilbo greeting. For your hospitality, our sincerest thanks, and for your offer of professional assistance, our grateful acceptance. Terms: cash on delivery up to and not exceeding 1/14 of total profits, if any. All traveling expenses guaranteed in any event. Funeral expenses to be defrayed by us or our representatives if occasion arises and the matter is not otherwise arranged for. Thinking it unnecessary to disturb your esteemed repose, we have proceeded in advance to make requisite preparations and shall await your respected person at the Green Dragon Inn, Bywater, at 11 a.m. sharp. Trusting that you will be punctual, we have the honor to remain, yours deeply, Thorin and Company." "That leaves you just 10 minutes. You'll have to run," said Gandalf. "But," said Bilbo. "No time for it," said the wizard. "But," said Bilbo again. "No time for that either. Off you go." To the end of his days, Bilbo could never remember how he found himself outside without a hat, walking stick, or any money, or anything that he usually took when he went out, leaving his second breakfast half finished and quite unwashed up, putting his keys into Gandalf's hands and running as fast as his furry feet could carry him down the lane, past the great mill, across the water, and then on for a mile or more. Very puffed he was when he got to Bywater, just on the stroke of 11, and found he had come without a pocket handkerchief. "Bravo!" said Balin, who was standing at the inn door looking out for him. Just then all the others came round the corner of the road from the village. They were on ponies, and each pony was slung about with all kinds of baggages, packages, parcels, and paraphernalia. There was a very small pony, apparently for Bilbo. "Up you two get, and off we go," said Thorin. "I'm awfully sorry," said Bilbo, "but I've come without my hat, and I've left my pocket handkerchief behind. I don't have any money. I didn't get your note until after 10:45 to be precise." "Don't be precise," said Dwalin, "and don't worry. You will have to manage without pocket handkerchiefs and a good many other things before you get to the journey's end. As for the hat, I've got a spare hood and cloak in my luggage." That's how they all came to start, jogging off from the inn one fine morning, just before May, on laden ponies, and Bilbo was wearing a dark green hood, a little weather-stained, and dark green cloak borrowed from Dwalin. They were too large for him, and he looked rather comic. What his father Bungo would have thought of him, I daren't think. His only comfort was that he couldn't be mistaken for a dwarf, as he had no beard. They had not been riding very long at all, when up came Gandalf, very splendid on a white horse. He had brought a lot of pocket handkerchiefs, Bilbo's pipe and tobacco, so that after that the party went along merrily, and they told stories or sang songs as they rode forward all day, except, of course, when they stopped for meals. These didn't come quite as often as Bilbo would have liked them, but he still began to feel that adventures were not so bad after all. At first, they had passed through Hobbit lands, a wild, respectable country inhabited by decent folk, with good roads, an inn or two, and now and then a dwarf or a farmer ambling by on business. Then they came to lands where people spoke strangely and sang songs Bilbo had never heard before. Now they had gone far into the lone lands, where there were no people left, no inns, and the roads grew steadily worse. Not far ahead, were dreary hills rising higher and higher, dark with trees. On some of them were old castles with an evil look, as if they had been built by wicked people. Everything seemed gloomy, for the weather that day had taken a nasty turn. Mostly, it had been as good as May can be, even in merry tales, but now it was cold and wet. In the lone lands, they had been obliged to camp when they could, but at least it had been dry. To think it will soon be June, grumbled Bilbo, as he splashed along behind the others in a very muddy track. It was after tea time, it was pouring with rain, and had been all day. His hood was dripping into his eyes, his cloak was full of water, his pony was tired and stumbled on stones. The others were too grumpy to talk, and I'm sure the rain has got into the dry clothes and the food bags, thought Bilbo. Bother burgling and everything to do with it. I wish I was at home by my nice hole in the fire with the kettle just beginning to sing. It was not the last time that he had wished that. Still, the dwarves jogged on, never turning round or taking any notice of the hobbit. Somewhere behind the gray clouds, the sun must have gone down, for it began to get dark as they went down into a deep valley with a river at the bottom. Wind got up, and willows along its bank bent and sighed. Fortunately, the road went over an ancient stone bridge, for the river, swollen with the rains, came rushing down from the hills and mountains in the north. It was nearly night when they had crossed over. The wind broke up the gray clouds, and a wandering moon appeared above the hills between the flying rags. Then they stopped, and Thorin muttered something about supper, and where shall we get a dry patch to sleep on? Not until then did they notice that Gandalf was missing. So far he had been with them. So far he had come all the way with them, never saying if he was in the adventure or merely keeping them company for a while. He had eaten most, talked most, and laughed most, but now he simply was not there at all. Just when a wizard would have been most useful too, groaned Dorian Nori, who shared the hobbit's views about regular meals, plenty and often. They decided in the end that they would have to camp where they were. They moved to a clump of trees and thought it was drier under them. The wind shook the rain off the leaves, and drip drip was most annoying. Also, the mischief seemed to have gotten to the fire. Dwarves can make a fire almost anywhere out of anything, wind or no wind, but they could not do it that night, not even Owen and Glóin, who were specially good at it. Then one of the ponies took a fright at nothing and bolted. He got into the river before they could catch him out again, and Fili and Kili nearly drowned, and all the baggage that he carried was washed away off of him. Of course, it was mostly food, and there was not mighty little left for supper, and less for breakfast. There they sat, glum and wet and muttering, while Owen and Glóin went on trying to light a fire and quarreling about it. Bilbo was sadly reflecting that adventures are not all pony rides in May sunshine. When Balin, who was always their lookout man, said, "There's a light over there, and there's a hill some way off with trees on it, pretty thick in parts." Out of the dark mass of trees, they could now see a light shining, a reddish, comfortable-looking light, as it might be fires or torches twinkling. When they had looked at it for some while, they fell into arguing. Some said no, and some said yes. Some said that they could but go and see, and anything was better than little supper, less breakfast, wet clothes all the night. Others said, "These parts are known too well and too near the mountains. Travelers seldom come this way now. The old maps are no use. Things have changed for the worse, and the road is unguarded. They have seldom even heard of the king around here, and the less inquisitive you are as you go along, the less trouble you are likely to find." Some said, "After all, there are 14 of us," and others said, "Where has Gandalf got to?" This remark was repeated by everybody.
You didn't tell me you're gonna read.